The evidence shows that we still haven't got the basics right.
And a lot of young, especially young Africans, do not have the skills that they need for these next couple of decades.
Are you an older sibling or an only sibling?
I'm a younger sibling. Why were those only two options?
In South Africa, we've got POPI, we've got GDPR, but the reality is there are no clear approaches to implement this.
When you even think about localization, it's not just about translating a platform from English to Swahili.
There's a need to also, in addition to thinking big, to think small. And small not meaning insignificant or less than the bigger problem, but actually small meaning like when you're thinking about what is the issue that an individual is experiencing. Hi everyone, and welcome to my third episode of Blank Canvas Dialogues. I'm Jerusha Govender, and if you recall from my previous podcast, these are really about sharing lessons and experiences and engaging with different thinkers who are interested and really driving change in the digital and data space. And today I'm really excited that I get to speak to Neema Iyer, somebody who I've kind of social stalked for a while. We've been on similar and different paths, both working on the African continent, both working on data for development, but Neema also brings very specific and unique knowledge around digital rights. So do listen to this podcast and like and subscribe and share it as well. And do remember as well to visit my website, which is jerushagovender.com, where you can book a meeting with me. Neema, good to have you on the podcast all the way in Sydney, Australia. Please, can you do a quick intro so that the rest of the podcast audience gets to know who you are?
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I feel very honored. And yeah, just as you said, we've had set similar journeys, and I always felt that I could look to you to also see, how you were doing and how things were going. And I also drew a lot of inspiration from the work that you did, which I think we will dig into a little bit more. But as for myself, my name is Neema Iyer, as you said. I like to call myself an artist and a creative technologist. And I do a ton of things. I have a lot of different hats, but I think for this conversation, I'm the founder of Policy, which is a feminist civic tech collective that is really interested in understanding how emerging technology is impacting our society and vice versa through the lens of digital inclusion, data science, data rights, digital rights, just looking at any touch point between technology and society and what that actually means, and especially doing it from an African and a feminist perspective, because these voices are often left behind in conversations about how tech is developed. And I absolutely love it. I've always been a huge fan of technology ever since the first time I went on the internet. And I've always enjoyed tinkering with different types of technology. I've never got into coding per se, but I love building things with no-code tools or other kinds of tools. And on the other side, I'm also an artist. I love doing digital art. I also do paintings, mainly with acrylic. And I've recently started doing more of batik art. So I'm really interested in seeing how I can combine this different media together and also figure out how my love of technology and just this thinking more broadly about what our future looks like. So combining all of that together is really where I come alive, I guess.
Awesome. So Neema, I'm keen to hear about your why. I think we have had some conversations where we talk about our experiences when I was at Data Innovators and just as an entrepreneur and some of the ideas. But what would you say is your why? Like why did you decide that actually you want to focus on the digital space and figure out how you integrate like your art? Like what was what was your passion or that kind of pivotal moment that said this is where I want to focus my time and attention?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's actually like a certain moment in time where it came to me. So several years ago, I was working on large scale mobile projects and trying to figure out how can you get data from really remote areas, thinking about areas where, for example, people don't speak English, or maybe they don't even speak whatever the next language after a colonial language is, and trying to reach those people and get their opinions or get their feedback. Those were kind of some of the projects I was working on. And at the same time, my mom was dealing with some personal issues whereby after a long period of grieving, she had finally decided to transfer the house from her mother's name to her name. And the process just took forever. It was so painful. dealing with bureaucratic processes. Like she would go there almost every week. And she was lucky in that she was a short distance to this government office. But when she went there, she would see people who had come from hours away, just trying to get one document. And this went on for 2 years, where she would keep going, trying to get this simple document of transferring a house from one person's name to another. And just watching that, and just from my experiences with different touch points with government, I figured out, there has to be a better way of just interacting with the services that a lot of us pay taxes for, or just the services that are there for citizens. There has to be a better way of using data and technology to make these processes better, easier. And that was really my why. I was like, we can't go on like this. We can't go on where a lot of people travel long distances, spend a lot of resources, and are often met with very poor services. And, government staff were not particularly helpful or nice. And just at that time, I was really thinking about how can digitalization change this process, but not just from the point of view of let's make a platform, because I think that's what I'm still seeing today. And I'm actually putting out a blog next week on what civic tech could look like. And it's, when you even think about localization, it's not just about translating a platform, from English to Swahili. It's about what actually makes this platform the most useful it can be for the people that are going to use it. And so that was really my why. It is still my why, because we have made a lot of progress in terms of digital government across Africa, but I still feel like we have a long way to go. So in terms of how I started policy, that's the answer. But I know that doesn't answer the full question of like from where it started to what it became. So I'm happy to take any follow-up questions on that.
I think it gives me insight into your why, because what stands out for me and what I've seen as well is that often in development, we think about what the why, which is also important, is a big why. And I think that we end up thinking about the larger problem, but actually there's a need to also, in addition to thinking big, to think small, and small not being meaning insignificant or, less than the bigger problem, but actually small meaning like when you're thinking about actually what is the issue that an individual is experiencing. What is it my pain point, or as a mother, as a female? And I think those things then drive better solutions, because often we make an assumption about like the aggregated view. So I mean that's what stands out for me, because I think personally also some of my why has come from like the thinking smaller, thinking about the individual, and being like, actually I worked when I like my first internship, I think I've shared this previously also on the first podcast, where I worked in health facilities. And the first kind of innovation I feel that I introduced was just realizing that there was various people working in health facilities, and we were still faxing documents of data. And it is a time where we have email, we had email and still have email, and we had computers, and there was assumptions about individuals' capacity to use that. And I was like, actually, you are making them work harder and there are tools to help us do this in a simpler way. And actually, they also want to develop their long-term skills. So how do we train them up? And I think that's like where I felt also like some of the why was like, we never really think about the experience of the one employee or the one person or the one patient, and how does that aggregate to the bigger solutioning. Yeah, I think I'm just kind of reflecting on like how that, like your experience with your mom, and it makes sense, and how that then feeds into, as an entrepreneur, coming up with like a bigger solution or a detailed solution. But then there's the art side. So I'm also keen to hear from you, Neema, about like where does that come in? Because this is something I guess I'm grappling with at the moment. I'm like, I'm trying to make these two pieces of me meet. Like they live their separate lives, and sometimes it is integrated in my data visualization or communication work. But can you tell us about some of your art projects and those where you felt was directly linked to potentially like a development issue or the why that you speak about? Like, how did you bring these things together?
Yeah, great question. And I really like how you framed, the bigger why and then looking at the smaller problems. I just wanted to touch upon that because a lot of what we do now seems disconnected from the bigger why, but it all does eventually feed into it. But moving on to the art. So I have always loved art. Like some of my first memories are of drawing on the wall in my bedroom. And looking back, I'm very surprised my parents didn't stop me. But like there was this entire wall, like it was almost like a mural of little scribbles on the wall. And I wish someone had taken a photograph of it, but I don't know what those scribbles were or what they looked like. But, my whole life, I've always loved doing art, and, parents giving advice, they're always like, you can do art, but it should be a hobby. It shouldn't be something you focus your life on. So for a long time, they kind of drilled it in me that I should become a doctor. And, so art would always take a back seat. And then when I started policy, I had entered a field that I was relatively new to, because I was coming from a very different, like, mobile for development field, and I was trying to enter more into the data science field. And, for the most part, I was a nobody. And how I actually got into it, like the actual moment, was that I went to a conference on digital rights, and I decided to make little sketches of the sessions that I attended. Like I took my tablet and I would make little sketches, because I felt, like if I make these little sketches, then people will get to know who I am, because they might, like it, they might retweet it, and then they might want to meet me, and then we might get to work together. Like that was kind of where I was thinking of that. And it actually did work. People really loved the little sketches I made, and that sort of gave me a little bit more of a name when I was totally new in the sector. And then from that moment, I was like, okay, this is actually very powerful. Like people were really able to connect with the content through art. And that was just a very pivotal moment for me. Like, and then from that moment on, we used art in everything we did, because I was the one doing the art. So I was the illustrator, and it wasn't any additional like cost, because when we started, we didn't have any money. I did not have money to hire an illustrator. And so that's how it started. And then I just started to really enjoy it, because I no longer had to put art on the back seat. I had to say, like, what, actually, this is a part of my business. This is a part of what I need to do as an output. And somehow that like really made me focus on the art and actually do the art. And then we decided, let's take it one step further. Let's put the art in the project. So we did projects where we work with other artists to talk about data in creative ways. And this is actually where you really stepped in. Like the first time that I came across your work on data artistry, like it totally blew my mind. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And it was such a big inspiration for me. And I really wanted to take that forward in Uganda. And so we worked with local communities, we collected data, we worked on murals. And every time those pictures pop up in my phone, it's actually one of the best and most fun projects I've ever done. Like the combination of art, data, and community, it's just such a special place. And I wish I could recreate that energy and just that passion from that moment. So it's just something that really brings me alive. And I love that you can take complicated topics, jargony topics, boring topics, and you can bring art and breathe such a new life into it. I just really love that potential that art has. How would you say that you incorporated it into your work?
So I feel that I've incorporated the kind of artistic thinking more than the actual art. So I think that's what inspires me about what you've done. Like I've seen your actual art pieces, and that's and they're amazing. And I see how you bring that kind of your art output and the style into your work itself. Like everything from the documentation to your branding. I love that. I think on my side, how I've brought art, it's been mainly through like kind of the thinking process, and some of it in visual elements as well. So, I mean, the data visualization has been a space where I feel I express my artistic side, because it's thinking about everything from, from color to layout, and also the thinking deeply about how you take messy or complex data and information and make that something meaningful, something people can feel. So I think that's where it comes in. But something I'm trying to stretch more is that like the actual art, my art is very abstract and sometimes absurd. And I feel there's like this, I don't know, this imposter syndrome around sharing the art output, which is like similar and related to how I've done it in my work. So work has been almost like trying to, in a sneaky way, introduce my art, or the way I see things I know is very different. Like I can visually unpack things and see kind of masses of information in my head, and that's me being an artist. or even in the way we've like designed things like brought on videographers. That's kind of been an artistic expression. But what I do want to do more of is create the actual art output and not be kind of ashamed of some of those pieces, because sometimes I think, I don't know how it has been for you, but my art is like really personal. And now I'm trying to look at how do I bridge the personal aspect or that individual story. And because I do agree with what you're saying, like art, I feel it's a universal language. And data is important, but not everyone gets it. And not everyone has to like understand like data in a graph and whatnot, but it's important. And how do we use this universal language and combine that with the importance of data and express it in a different way? So I think, yeah, well, a bit of that's how I've integrated my artistic thinking in my work, but I'm also on a journey of looking at how I do like express, and I'm a lot more bold about the art, which is what I really, when I look at you, that's what I see. I'm like, and it's awesome that you were inspired by data artistry, because data artistry was also about like really driving that in other people. Like, how can you think about it? How can we train this and build this? And in some cases, we've seen people think differently and more artistically about data. But how can we, like, what is the next level of this? And this is something I'm currently toying with and playing with in my passion projects at the moment.
Love it.
So, I mean, switching from the art a bit to the social entrepreneurship, you are also, I would say you are also a multi-potentialite, which is a term I've used previously, because you have these many skills and it seems like you can excel in all of them. Like if you're going to go into music, you'll probably be a great musician, but you've also been a social entrepreneur. And as we both know, entrepreneurship, it's hardcore. It's everyone often sees like the great outputs and, you know, the growth of an organization, but it's grueling in the background. And I'm keen to, maybe we can share a bit of our experiences. I mean, what were some of your like challenges in building policy, but also just as an entrepreneur? Like, what were things you were grappling with as you built that organization?
Such a good question. What was I not grappling with is the question. So, so when I was conceptualizing the idea of founding an organization, I was imagining only the fun parts. I was imagining myself doing research and, running projects or, mentoring my colleagues. And then in a few years, it was none of that. Like all of that was gone. And all that I had left was admin and operations. And I had to look back and say, like, how did I get here? Like, I'm not doing any of the things that I love. Like, I'm doing grueling admin work. It was very eye-opening. And also, like in my younger days, I was like, oh, I would love a job where I can just delegate. No, absolutely not. Those are things that I learned the hard way, that delegating is not as much fun as it seems, and that I actually really like doing the actual work. But what were the challenges? Many, many, many. So first of all, keeping the lights on. I think I had many sleepless nights about that because, I just made a promise to myself that I always wanted to be a good boss, I guess. And so I always put everyone else ahead of me. Like I didn't take a salary for a very long time because I wanted to make sure everybody else was paid. So it was like keeping the lights on, funding, fundraising. That's one big piece. The second big piece is just finding good staff, because I'm not totally sure how it is in South Africa, but in many other African countries, there's like multiple economies in the one economy. So, just to give you an example, when I was trying to hire a finance manager, just to give you rough numbers, one person quoted $500, like a salary of like $500. The other person quoted $5,000, and then this other person quoted like $20,000. And it's like, how are these all in the same society, like that? Because you don't even know then what is the actual going rate for a finance manager for a small organization. And that's also very limiting because, and this is something that, even till today, I'm grappling with. I don't have the answers to this, but it's also something that got a lot worse during COVID, which is that we, like, local organizations cannot pay as much as global international organizations do, especially when those global international organizations are your funders. And so there's this constant stream of good quality stuff from local organizations to international. Like it's like a sort of internal brain drain that happens, and there's no way that you can compete with the level of salary that's offered by these other companies. So on the one hand, you're really excited, for your staff because they're going to be earning, a lot more. But at the other hand, what does that do to local companies when they cannot find, and, maybe they've even trained that competent staff and then 2 years later they get poached away. So that's something that was very, very difficult to deal with. But I mean, I could go on and on. This is not a podcast about challenges of social entrepreneurship. But I think those would be my two very big ones, which is just the pains of growing an organization and just keeping it alive. Because there were many moments where I'd be like, oh, I think this is it. I think this is the end. I think we'll reach the end of the road, like 2 years in or 3 years in. And then finally by year 4, I was like, oh, wait, no. I think this is going to work. I think this is going to work. We've got something here. So it's always having that doubt, if things will actually work out in the end. And yeah, but the challenge is like every day. And there's just things you never would imagine would be a challenge in running an organization. But it's been an amazing learning process. Like I feel like now I can do audits, I can do finance, I can do fundraising, I can do marketing, like whatever. If you have to put on all those hats, sometimes all of them on the same day. So yeah, it's nice to be on the other side and look back at that. But what about you? What do you think were some of your challenges?
I mean, you're right. Like, I think any entrepreneur could write lists and books about the challenges, because I feel like part of being an entrepreneur is like things are ever changing, and you have many balls thrown at you, and you're trying to keep a ship sailing, and you like whatever, trying to steer it in the right way, plugging holes, keeping people motivated to keep steering the ship. So there are many, but the ones that you have spoken to do resonate. I mean, the people one has always been a big thing. I feel like in some ways, the coming to terms, one, when it comes to like people leaving, just like attrition of staff has been a big experience. Like, because when you start up, a lot of the time, the type of people that you need to buy into the vision, because it is a bit of a shaky ship, right? And not everyone, some people just want stability. They want to have the corporate role or be on the 5-year development project and, have some comfort that's, and when I was starting out, that wasn't the case. In some ways, I don't know, I was like lucky or whatever it was that I had people around that really, I mean, let me not say it's luck, because there was work involved. That there were people that believed in the vision. And so they gave time, and eventually they're like, okay, Jerusha, now you need to pay me my worth now. So people were flexible with me around their time and salary, and many people, like I have a great network of people that I'm like, I need you now for free because you're my friend, I owe you. And then people helped out. And I think that helped for a period, but eventually you do need to pay people their worth, and you do need to be aware that people don't stay, especially young people. Like, I'm passionate about building up young people, but young people want to grow and move on. And then it's hard when they leave. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, you need to do you. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it's building. Yeah, I know I did with the other directors that I then joined with. We did a lot of thinking about, like, how do you structure around that dynamic, that we are not at the stage where, unless you are in a senior role, that, not everyone is willing to stay on board for 10 years yet. It's just, that's the nature of it. So how do you build the systems that allow for people to come in, build them up, they move on, and you bring in new people? Not always ideal, but that's the way you think about it. And I think the other big thing, so aside from the people thing, and I'm keen to hear from you on this side, is the personal challenges, because I think many entrepreneurs, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a little bit obsessive. Like, it's like it helps you be a good entrepreneur if you like see an issue and you're just like going at it. You're like, I'm going to do what it takes. And that for me was like a strength. It helped me really build things, but it was also something that was eating at me physically and mentally, and I needed to find ways to counter that. So I think that, like, the mental and physical strain of entrepreneurship and of being like trying to drive something was something that I experienced many times. And there was a period where I'm like, okay, I've got it figured out. I'm running, I'm doing all the right things and things are flowing. And then you hit with a major project or a major, like issue, and you then you kind of have really bad behaviors. Like I'm drinking more coffee, I'm sleeping later. And I feel like that was like the ups and downs, this ebb and flow of entrepreneur life that I grappled with a lot. I'm like, how the heck do I stay on the level path and still do the things, like not have to work 24 hours in order to achieve things. And I found that like actually other entrepreneurs around me were also experiencing the same thing. I ended up like focusing a lot on mindfulness as a way to resolve that personal challenge, which honestly has helped a lot. And just like keep myself accountable to healthy behaviors, knowing that I will not stop being the kind of obsessive personality in my next initiative or wherever I go. But yeah, I mean, on your side, on the personal side, what are some of your kind of what are your tactics to remain sane?
I take a lot of naps. Part the napper. If you have a problem, just take a nap. I feel like, and I'm still like trying to come to terms with this, but I think that I started thinking in this nonstop way, and I'm still trying to undo that. Like, I stepped away from policy about 6 months ago, and I'm trying to figure out like just how to stop coming up with ideas all the time. Like, because that was a lot of what I did at policy. Like it's what I love. I love coming up with ideas. I love conceptualizing new projects, but it also feels that sometimes it's like, it's enough. Like, like let's go with what we have. Let's pick a few and go, but it's like constantly. So I think when you said mindfulness, that really stuck out for me, because these past few weeks, like in 2024, it's something I'm really trying to work on, like just a little bit more peace in my head and just quieting all the ideas, and especially this time of my life where, I'm in between things. I'm in this transition phase and then trying to figure out what to do next. So it's just like this avalanche of ideas and possible, and they're all exciting. So it's not like a negative emotion. Like it's exciting, but it also is just too much. And I'm just trying to I'm still trying to learn how to just be a little bit more quiet in my head. So that's definitely, I totally feel that.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm experiencing. I mean, I practice mindfulness, but I'm actually grappling. Like I'm dealing with the exact same thing because I'm on a career break at the moment, and it was meant to be a break, and then I'm finding it like I filled the space. I have this
absolutely
knack of like filling spaces, and you actually don't have to fill spaces.
Exactly.
Like yeah, I know, and I've literally filled space. Like so, at the moment, I've gone through a So the figurative filling spaces is like thinking of new ideas and so on. But in my home, I've cleared out and reorganized my books. So I have like stacks of books all over the house where I've like prioritized them. And then I also created this huge canvas that I built, and it's too big for the house. So it's like being moved around. So it's funny that it's like I can see myself literally filling spaces with things while I have free time.
Exactly.
And also being like, yeah, in some ways it's like forcing me to look at it and be like, why books? Why are you here? Judicial, why did you create this pile of books? And yeah.
Well, I think it's also this sense of like feeling that you can only feel good or reward yourself from productivity. And I think that is actually very difficult to unlearn. Like even subconsciously, at the end of the day, I'll be like, oh, I did this and this and this and this. And I'm like, who's counting? Who cares? Like, no one cares what you did today. Like, it's not, you don't get a cookie at the end of the day, but it's just this like really bad learned behavior, and trying to disentangle that, I think is going to be tricky.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I know you as a professional a lot, but I don't know like your personal, I'm not going to ask you two personal questions, but are you an older sibling or an only sibling?
I'm a younger sibling. Why were those only two options?
Okay, never. I was like, I'm trying to categorize you. I'm like, oh, this is definitely an older sibling. But actually, my theory is now, my theory has fallen. Never mind. Because I find like the fact that we have like similar tendencies or similar, I notice similarities about us, but I'm an older sibling.
Okay.
And generally I find that older siblings are the ones that like feel like they need to be doing the things. But anyway, ignore that. It doesn't, my theory is false. You are who you are.
I love it.
I'm like, this is an older sibling thing. And like, one of my,
what if it's an older girl child thing?
Possibly. Are you the only girl?
I am.
Okay, maybe.
Bring your theory back here.
maybe. Yeah, because possibly. We'll see. I don't know. Anyone out there
data.
who's listening to the podcast, if you've got data on this, please share, because we'd like to know, like, why are we the way we are? But moving on, I mean, going back to kind of the areas that we both focus on, like development and thinking about, digital rights and responsible data. I'm particularly like in the next decade, that's kind of where my brain is going to be at still. Like, how am I influencing what responsible data looks like? Is through art, through creativity, through various kind of channels. And I would like to drive that, because I feel like that's I feel like there's so much that is going on in terms of like the increased amount of data, the role that tech is going to be playing. But the evidence shows that we still haven't got the basics right. Like, yes, we've got in South Africa, we've got POPI, we've got GDPR, we've got certain guidelines and frameworks and strategies that are saying this is how data governance or digital governance might look like. But the reality is there are no clear like approaches to implement this or to hold people accountable. And so that's where I want to focus that's part of where I'll be focusing in the decade that's coming. But I mean, yourself, Neema, like looking into the future, like what do you foresee are areas in the digital, in tech for development space that you think needs a lot of attention and is a space that you're going to be spending time in?
What if I'm not going to spend time in the digital space? No, I feel like from the conversations that I've had that in the past 10 years, we moved from a space of techno-optimism to techno-pessimism. And that's sort of how all the conversations also moved. So I think you'll remember, like, so when I was working on like M4D projects, mobile for development, there'd always be these headlines about how like the mobile phone is going to change Africa forever. And, now a lot of the headlines are hide your data or else you will, bad things will happen to you. Like that's a lot of the framing nowadays, which is a bit of a shame. We have done research on, data protection, data governance, and like even at policy, I know that some of the framing has been in that direction. Or even when we teach people about like digital security, that it's very much from that framing, these are all the things that can go wrong. And I do feel like it is a bit of a shame that is the direction that the conversations went, because I am still a techno optimist, and it is sad that tech has been used for a lot of negative things, and the direction that it's going in with like over monetization of everything. I know it feels like I'm on a tangent, but so coming back, I still feel like we made this big jump where digital skills are still lacking. Like, even if you're going to try to have a conversation about data protection with the everyday person on the street, they don't care. It's not relevant to them, If, for example, like when we did research in Uganda, one of our first research studies on online violence against women, we picked a couple of cities, and we found that, if you left the capital and you went to other cities, like finding a woman with a smartphone, like that alone was a challenge. We had a very low bar for like what we considered internet use. I think it was like you use the internet at least once a week, like whether it was for 1 minute or 5 minutes you use it once a week. And even then our enumerators really struggled to find a woman with a smartphone or a woman that met that criteria. And so it's boring, right? It's boring to go back to that conversation we had 10 years ago where we're still talking about digital inclusion, about basic digital skills, about, connectivity. But I feel like we never left there. We just moved on to sexy topics. And a lot of especially young Africans do not have the skills that they need for these next couple of decades. And so that's something that I'm actually thinking about. Like, if we can bring back that topic and work with groups that have been traditionally marginalized, but different ways of thinking about tech. I don't know if you saw the blog post that I wrote this week, but thinking about, like, is coding holding people back? Like, is coding like the only way that we're thinking about technology? Like, what are other ways that people can become involved in the digital ecosystem? But it's just not enough. We need a lot more. Like, the curriculum of schools is not keeping up. Technology is changing so rapidly. I don't even know what decade the school curricula are in. I went to a mentoring session a few years ago with girls in my neighborhood, in an urban neighborhood secondary school. None of the girls I spoke to had ever touched a computer or a laptop, or whatever. So I still feel like there's a lot of work to be done there, and it's about redirecting people's attention to say that we haven't actually gone as far as we think we have, and even when people do use the internet, how is it being used? So yeah, I'm as you know, I'm still in between and trying to like figure things out, but I feel like we still need to be back there, even though there are many more pressing issues that the Western world is focusing. So yeah, that's what we're at.
Yeah, I think it sounds like we aligned on those things, and I think I totally see it as well, where we're now jumping to what's responsible AI and, what's your governance strategy for AI. And I'm like, I think we didn't, like, we just we didn't even stop at the, our data governance stop or digital access. Like, we can move there, but you didn't get that right. And
yeah.
I mean, just sharing an experience where, like, the penny dropped for me as well. It's maybe a few years ago, we did a project where we had to collect a lot of data, and there was personal information. And, in South Africa, we've got POPI, which is the Protection of Personal Information Act, and we had to abide by that, which is fine. But I think, like, in reality, it's like we haven't really thought, what does it mean for people that are collecting data and where people's data is housed, and without creating, like you say, this fear around what it means to be sharing data, what are the right systems to do that. Like, we must all hide our data. But in fact, like, when we did that project, we found that the practicality was that to safely share data wasn't actually practical, because you were in context where you have a gogo who is a grandmother who does not have a phone, and in order for them to be part of this initiative, they needed to submit ID, other contact information, and they were in a rural location, and to travel to the local office was very far. So the best way was doing it online. And because she didn't have access to a phone to do it herself, she was going to go to someone's daughter who had a phone, and it's a friend of a friend. So really, not connected, and use that person's phone to WhatsApp information, WhatsApp pictures of IDs and so on. And for them, that was the only way they could do that. And it became restrictive because that wasn't allowed according to, to ensure safety of that individual's data. We could not do that. But we're like, the practicality is that we haven't created a system to allow them to safely do that. So by saying you cannot provide your information, we are now excluding them from this initiative. But they actually, so I think that's one where you see that the reality of, like, your policy or your strategy hasn't been well thought through. But we're now moving to the next already. So how do we solve that first? Maybe we need to build better systems here. Maybe it's like, actually focus on, like, let's go back to infrastructure. Like, why did we stop and assume we have sufficient infrastructure, and but we're building large data centers that are not benefiting everyone just yet. So I hear you on that, and I totally resonate. It's like solving those issues. And I like the term the remaining a tech optimist point, because there is a tension at the moment with what the information we have, that you are steering to, like, negative discourse a lot. And how do we maintain that balanced view? So Neema, we reaching the end of our awesome conversation. To close off, what is your parting thoughts or your key bits of advice to others who may be similar social entrepreneurs in the space that we work in?
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. And as I said, it's very similar parts, and it's really fun to hear that we grappled with so many of the same things. And perhaps that is what I will actually close with, in that I think there's so much value in people on the same journey learning together. Like now in retrospect, when I think back, I wish that, maybe you, I, and then some other women who were starting their own, organizations were together in a WhatsApp group and that we had access to each other, because I got added to this WhatsApp group a few years ago. And it wasn't people starting out, it was new directors, but we were all different ages and different points in our journey as a director. Like some were founders and some had just entered the role. But the questions that people asked was so helpful because it was things that all of us were struggling with. At that time, it was like, what's the taxation law for remote workers from this country to that country, or contracting, or dealing with funders, or just venting, and I think that that's so helpful. It's something I did not have, unfortunately. But I would really encourage people who are starting out to try to form these kinds of groups. Like even if it's just one other person, two other people, just come together and just share what you're going through, because it could be what someone else is also going through. And I think from that group, what I learned is that I felt like I was reinventing the wheel and I didn't need to. A lot of what I was grappling with, obviously, other people have already grappled with and have already solved, and that there is an easy fix for it. But, when you're in the thick of things, you can't see that. And it feels like you've got to build all these forms from scratch and all these processes. And, you've got to mentor yourself, basically, and you've just got to make your way through. So my advice is really just get together with other people. And then the other thing is that there's so many interesting niches that are not serviced, I guess. I went to this meeting in Malaysia that was funded by the Association of Progressive Communication. It was put on by APC, but it was funded by IDRC. And that's where I really opened my eyes to the concept of feminist internet. And I got to learn about feminists working on technology. And that was just such a beautiful, eye-opening experience. And that really changed the trajectory of policy in a big way. And, we became very proud to say that, we were thinking of things through a feminist lens, and we did get a lot of backlash for that. We continue to get backlash for that. We oftentimes get questions that's like, okay, but what about the boy child? Or what about men? But the thing is, like, this is what I want to focus on. Somebody else can focus on the boy child. We don't, like, each organization doesn't have to do everything. And just in that way, I think there's so many niches that are underserved, and that people can really get into and really have a lot of impact, rather than just like a catch-all working for everyone, because as a small organization, you can't reach everyone. That's just the truth. But overall, this conversation has been super enlightening. I think I really enjoyed the part where, you sort of helped me think about like the bigger why and then the smaller whys. And I think when, you're making a strategic plan, that actually really helps to organize the information, and that we cannot as a small organization fix these big problems in the world, but we can play smaller parts in addressing the challenges that lead to the bigger problem. So I think it's been really helpful to just hear you reframing some of these issues. But what about you? What do you feel like is your takeaway from this discussion?
Well, I think the one is it does help when you speak to other entrepreneurs and you commiserate around certain things, and it just makes you feel normal. So I think one, like, I feel normal, like that when I hear the things that you say, it's like, okay, yeah, like this was all part of like the natural path. And I mean, even you exiting policy, I felt it helped me as I was thinking about exiting data innovators and, transitioning out. So I think that's I am normal. And I think for other entrepreneurs, hopefully they are listening to this and also resonate and say, okay, I am normal. I'm okay. Yeah. I got this. But yeah, the other thing that stands out for me is still like hearing you speak about how you've brought together your creative, your artistic side, and you're still having this like passion for your development focus. I mean, that stands out for me. And just like, it also reminds me about, not losing sight of that, because sometimes we do get distracted by that voice that says, actually, art is just a hobby. Like do the focus on the other thing. But yeah, if you have that kind of that nagging call, is to listen to it and find ways to bring them together. And I think that's something I personally am still going to focus on and feel motivated from what you've shared. Yeah, I think those are the two key things that stand out for me. And I mean, I've shared many recommendations on the other podcasts as well. I think it's similar that um, for other entrepreneurs, it's find your tribe, because it can be a really lonely journey, and you need the tribe when you need an accountant, or you just need a voice. You need a bit of advice. And that's really an important part of staying a mindful entrepreneur, having that crew that keeps you accountable, but also that you have that support as you're building up. Because when you start up, you can't afford to pay for all of those roles, but there are people that are willing to share that. And just one last thought is that I'm really excited that when it was my birthday, I put out a call that as my gift, I'm sharing time and kind of openly saying, listen, I'm available for those that need a bit of mentorship.
That's
and people
lovely.
have reached out. And I think that's also like a last thought, is like just to, it's sometimes daunting to reach out to people and say, hey, I see what you're doing. Can we chat?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe kind of an encouraging thought to those that people have reached out, and I'm like, well done, you've done it. Because yeah, it can be scary to say, hey, can I speak to you? And you feel like maybe you don't have everything thought out or whatever it is. But to encourage those who are budding social entrepreneurs to reach out to those in your space. Maybe they're not the tribe, but it's the person that you want to learn from. And it really adds value to your own kind of development and your network to do that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Neema. This was awesome. I still wish I could sit with you in person and have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee, and that will happen.
Yeah, at some point.
Yeah, it will happen at some point.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of, it's cool that the fact that we have this kind of digital and data focus, and we've completely connected digitally and never in person. And I think that's just been part of our experience together. So thank you so much for the time, Neema, to be on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. What a fun discussion. And honestly, congratulations to you, to Data Innovators. Like, I love the work that you did, and it was very inspiring to watch from a distance. So yeah, and good luck with the rest of your podcast and whatever you decide for your next steps.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that third episode of the Blank Canvas Dialogues with Jerusha Govender, myself, and my awesome guest speaker, Neema Iyer. If you are keen to connect with me as I am exploring new opportunities in the coming future, please go to my website, which is jerushagovender.com, where you can book a meeting with me, as well as like and subscribe and share this podcast with fellow colleagues or others that are interested in our conversations on Blank Canvas Dialogues.